Let me see what's going on here. All right, so yeah, so I mean, you write a book. The book is about inclusivity, organizational inclusivity. You know,
Hmm.
and I think the piece that draws me into it is just the simple conversation that you mentioned where someone looked at your name, the case study where someone looked at your name and they say, you know, what kind of Al Qaeda name is
Yeah,
this?
that's a solid one. And it is funny because in the context, people would never believe that this would take place, but it actually happened in Jamaica, as you'd have read.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because I remember coming home and we always had good time in UK, and I was coming back to Jamaica. It was roughly 2008, and I was going to present at University of the West Indies Cross Cultural Conference. And I was happy, man. I landed fine and I felt good. I was moving quickly to the immigration line. And when I went there, the guy said to me, I mean, he looked at my name, he looked at my features, and then kind of pondered it himself and said, "What kind of Al Qaeda name is it?" And he was smiling and joking. Is what I'm saying. He's smiling and
Yeah.
joking, but he doesn't understand the context. So my reason for really bringing that across in the book was to bring to light the issue of inclusion does not rest in United States or England or other countries, but it is a issue that has to be addressed at every level within every country. And I think
Within
that
every country.
yeah, within every country, you know. So I think it gives you greater thought. People might think Jamaica will not have a problem with inclusion, but we do. We have a class system, and you can talk a little about that too.
So is it that the idea that because we say out of many, one people, there's this assumption that everyone accepts everyone as equal. You're saying that this is not necessarily the case.
It's not necessarily the case, and I did bring that across once, and I was reprimanded by another scholar. That is a false ideology because if we look carefully and we look at the history of Jamaica, we are many people in a population, but within that population, there are certain benefits and privileges that people share. For example, those individuals with wealth and power, and those individuals who might be coming out of a generation of poverty compared to those people living in Tivoli Gardens. So if you have
Yeah,
application, for example, and people's name being submitted and you put a Tivoli Gardens address, you know that is going to already stir something up. So I'm
yeah, yeah,
thinking there's a greater conversation that needs to be had in Jamaican context. Even look at schooling and how it's done across Jamaica. I had problems going back to my early days when I started my career
yeah,
because they would take the more privileged individuals to put them in the more A levels, while
yeah.
others who had the same qualifications would be left out. So we have a drastic system that we need to address, not
So
globally, but within
just to,
Jamaican context.
just to take it back a bit, the fact that you mentioned Jamaica, where in Jamaica what's your history in Jamaica? Tell me.
My history in Jamaica is it's quite interesting because if I told people, I've said to people, and I will not disclose it, I was born in a certain area. you know, they would say to me, no, 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 you could never come from that, because the constituents of that area might be similar to that of Tivoli Gardens, but they would say, no, you could never come out of that. But I was born in Kingston, spent a
Yeah,
few times, and for goodness, I thank God and people who supported me in my life because I had an aunt who saw that there was a need for greater intervention in my life with my mom, and then she moved us to Clarendon at a very early age of 4, and then
yeah.
from Clarendon to Montego Bay, and I spent
Wow.
majority of my life in Montego Bay. So if it wasn't for someone looking to give unselfishly towards two kids growing up, then I would not have been in this position.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
having looking back the other day when I saw Jamaica and I saw people in the COVID crisis standing up in line and one guy having a piece of cardboard over his head, I said to myself, it brought tears because I said to myself, that could have been me if
yeah,
someone
yeah.
did not take the time to mentor me and to pull me out of that. So I think in inclusion, opportunities, and not everyone will have the same opportunity as you and I have had.
So your book is looking at inclusivity in the workplace, it seems, organizational inclusivity. Why did you choose to focus on that?
I think it's a mission, because having completed a master's degree in England back in 2005 on inclusive education and equality and inclusion, I came to United States seeing a different picture, to be honest. I saw in UK that you could move based on your efforts, and there were
Yeah,
regulations and laws that govern that. And if you're qualified, people would come to you and say, listen, I see your potential. I really like it. In United States, I will categorically state that this is not the case.
yeah,
It is such an individualistic society that regardless if you do have the talent and you're shouting out the possibility, as a black person, you might not be seen. So
yeah,
my book on inclusivity brings across the need for organizations to kind of consider the need for inclusion, because I've always said, Dr. Barker, that the society reflects what is taking place in higher education or
yeah,
institution. So you cannot separate organizations from the issues that happen within our society. To
yeah,
say that they're
certainly.
separate and, oh, that would never happen in my organization, is wrong when it's happening in your society. So there are two areas that are very connected in many sense.
Yes, of course. So so you're saying that the book that you wrote is based on just your personal experiences and not necessarily.
It's based on personal experiences. If you look at the examples, I've used a lot of case studies. It reflects
Yeah,
Jamaica, it reflects England, it reflects United States, it reflects, for example, someone going to a restaurant, and because he's black or of a different ethnicity, he's treated differently. So
yeah,
it just not encompass the whole issue of higher education, educational institutions, but generally speaking, organizations in general, because I think many organizations have gotten to the point where they're thinking of inclusion as a tick box situation. We saw where there was an issue with a major restaurant, and that restaurant decided that they would close all the stores or franchisees for a day to have a workshop on
I think
diversity and
I think that
inclusion.
was Starbucks. I think it was.
Yeah, I didn't want to call it, but you did. You did.
Well,
Yes, yes, Starbucks did that. And I'm saying to myself, you have watered down the process and what requires inclusion to a point where you're saying, all right, you do a workshop and I've ticked my box and I'm on my way. It's not that way.
hold on. So when that was done, that was topical across the world, and I'd say many people saw that as a good thing. You're challenging that as a good thing.
I'm saying it's a good thing, but inclusion does not reside on a piece of paper saying that you've done a workshop and you've brought attention to it, but it requires sustained effort consistently in day-to-day practice. So I'm yet
Yeah.
to see the consistency regarding organizations who have had these one-day workshops, and for example, they bring a diversity and inclusion expert to see where they lie now in relation to their consistent practice, because I think that's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. So you mentioned that. So you're more thinking of it as being a culture that
It has
exists.
it has to be a culture, because let's figure it out. In United States, 401 years, we know what that has taken us to a point where we still are desiring to have the equal rights as any other person. And within the context of that, we see where laws have been put into place, but there has not been an extensive shift to the point that we're not to the point that would have prevented us from being at this place. So what I'm saying is, yes, we can have the laws and the regulations, but if people are not going through a behavioral change, then their practice of oppression, discrimination, and those attributes that lead to exclusion will still be there.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're getting to the heart of culture and
Mhm.
what defines a culture, isn't it? The kind of acceptable behaviors. One of the definitions I've seen is that a culture, you can define a culture by the behaviors that are acceptable within it.
That's true.
And so you're saying that you're talking about a workplace culture that has the right kind of behaviors, acceptable, that leads to
Acceptable,
inclusive practices.
inclusive practices, but then again, not everyone will want to be a part of that culture. So you're going to have people who are subjecting to that culture. So how do you regulate?
Yeah, how do
You
you
have to,
even
you
overcome
have
that?
to, I think one of the things you have to regulate by having training, of course, but you have to regulate by having a, a system where individuals can be reprimanded if they choose to go out of the culture of the organization. For example, I'll just give an example. I worked in UK in the higher education department for 5 years and worked several places in other institutions, but I would never go beyond what is my cultural responsiveness to say things that are in line with discriminatory practices. So I keep within that norm. But within the United States, that's complicated again, because what we have is a freedom of speech that
Yeah,
people say, I have the right to say certain things. But my philosophy is, and how you and I were brought up, is that with speech comes responsibility.
yeah,
So there we have a responsibility to develop an inclusive culture. Again, not everyone would agree, but then I say to myself, if you're thinking about that, then how do we have a declaration of independence that says that everyone has the right to be happy and to be free? Happiness cannot coexist when you have hate in the society and discriminatory practices
yeah,
based
yeah.
on freedom of speech. So I think
So,
it has to be developed over a period of time.
so when we talk about countries like, say, the US, and you use terms like inclusivity, I think it's quite easy for people to say, yeah, these societies aren't so-called inclusive because they are mixed with a lot of immigrants and people from different parts of the world. But you're saying that when you go back into, say, a culture like, your home culture, there is that issue exists as well.
I think the issue exists as well, but to maybe to a different level.
Yeah, in what
That
way?
becomes a cause of maybe class more than your color of your skin. Because in Jamaica, you are aware that there are certain levels of privileges that you can have based on your economic status, and for example, certain color too.
Yeah,
Colorism is a part that plays in Jamaica. So that's a part of it, but it's very dominant. You will not see the issue of color dominance in relation to discriminatory practices in Jamaica
yeah.
as you would see here. But
Okay,
but
okay.
I must pull this point out, because you when you reach Jamaica airport, you might see the aspect of how individuals who are white are treated compared to you as a black person entering the country. And
Yeah,
then again, I call my Jamaican people out for this, because if I come to my country, I should be treated just as the same way as a white tourist coming in. So I've
yeah.
seen where there are some discriminatory practices going on in that immigration and the custom department, and I'm calling them out now because they need to practice inclusion within that aspect too.
So how is that culture changed then?
I
It
think
seems, yeah. How do you change that culture?
I think education, I think inclusion and diversity for my Jamaican fellow men and women is an emerging concept. 5, maybe 10 years ago, I had a friend who was an education officer back in Jamaica, and he was going around to schools and asking them about diversity and inclusion because that was a rubric on the indicator. And he said when he went to the school, he just gave them a no because no one understood what the concept of diversity and inclusion
Yeah,
was. Fast track, no, I think they're developing that. But then again, we need more training because I think our education system is emerging to be an inclusive system. However, we need to kind of have some systems in place to support students and others who have specific needs that need to be addressed in our classroom back in Jamaica. And I must say, I did teach at the School of Hope and that School of Hope. That time, it was even labeled the School of Hope for the mental retardation. And I know they have changed the name, but just look at where we're coming from 1997 to now. They have changed the name, and I know they're progressing towards that greater movement towards inclusion. But I think we really need to take time to address how we are going to structure a system that allows for the identification of individuals with special needs, the support of individuals with special needs, and how we can make them into long life learners to achieve their full potential. I think those are key points.
so you're taking the concept of inclusivity as a workplace manifestation,
Yeah.
and now you're taking it into the school environment and using maybe the more common term, the inclusion.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is interesting. So you're saying, do you feel that there is enough going on in the system to educate the professionals in the system to be effective facilitators of learning when inclusion is required?
I think it's emerging. I think based on what I've seen, it's an emerging field in Jamaica. And I think when I had a recent conversation with a guy that took me on a raft down the Matabray roughly a year and a half ago. And what he said to me, he was outlining the problems he was having with his son. And I said to him, have you really spoken to the teacher? Because what you're saying to me, it suggests to me as if the son has a learning issue. And he said he spoke to the teacher, and the teacher told him that he should go to the Ministry of Education, and from there he go through another process. Now, this man cannot navigate the system.
Yeah.
So we need advocates to start with who will advocate for the children that we have or sitting or students sitting in front of them to ensure that they can navigate the system. Everyone coming into the school system should be at least given a test to identify their strengths, their weaknesses, if they have any, and also to support them. Because, look, I remember I had a friend in grade 6 back in Jamaica, grade 5 to be exact, and we went through school. Everything went well, and we were in our work days now. And a friend of mine said he was downstairs to meet me at the office. So I went downstairs and I came back. I met the guy, but I struggled to understand why his behavior was like this at this time. So I called my friend and said, I didn't know something happened to him or something. He said, no, he was always like that back in school. And I could see from this point he had a learning problem at this
Yeah.
stage in his life. So it's saying to me that the identification and addressing these issues were never addressed back in my time. Fast forward now, have we been able to identify all students with learning problems in schools? I think the answer is no. So we need a systematic approach
Yeah. Yeah.
to allow that to take place. And that's why we might have young boys especially being turning off from education because they're frustrated, they cannot learn because there are so many barriers they're facing in relation to accessing the curriculum.
What about the role of professionals who perhaps do not acknowledge that these
I,
needs require some form of personalization and differentiation?
there are so many things. Class ratio plays a big part in this. The resources that are necessary to support these students is another thing. You're looking at extra time to do that intervention. So I think while professionals will tell you, listen, I know the child has an issue,
Yeah.
but I am left with my hands tied because I do not have the support system. So we have to look at support systems in place to see where we can really strengthen these framework. And what I would love to talk about a little bit is what I mentioned in one of my book chapters when I talk about a multidisciplinary, multi-agency approach, where
Yeah,
we
go
can
on.
have social workers and counselors and even the police working within the school system to support the necessary individuals in the class. And what I love about England, and I know you're aware of this, we had back then, and I think they still do, they had a common assessment framework
Yeah, CAF.
where, yes, CAF, where the teacher would input data in that, but not necessarily see other information, but the information was documented to support that student, that child, through every aspect of their life until they ended high school. So I think we need a common assessment framework, something similar that can track students who are having difficulty and make that case go over. One of the most fascinating things I've come across, and I realized that we were very poor in addressing the issue, was the need of addressing students' need was basically when you look at the university campus. In my time attending university, I started with the NCU before going to UK. I've never heard of a student who had a statement coming into university. That was like you. I know you went to UWI. Did you hear a student entering who had a learning difficulty back in your time? I didn't.
Well, I think there are two sides to that. I think when we're talking about learning difficulty, the ones that are easy to discern. For example, we had two blind person, two
Yes,
visually
yes, you're
impaired
right. You're
persons.
right.
So it's obvious that they are,
It's
but
obvious,
I
obvious.
think
Yes.
the other side of it are the other ones, like the
The
ADHDs,
other
the
ones.
ones that are the hidden ones. But certainly, I remember on campus we had two visually impaired students, and
Yes,
quite
yes,
famous
yes.
as well. You know, I think Floyd Morris was one of
Yes,
them.
I heard about him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he used to play domino as well. Was really included, if I remember correctly, with
Yeah,
us. You
and
know.
the bottom line is those obvious because
Yeah.
remember
Yes.
the
It's, and
obvious
that's why I
one.
wanted to make that
Yeah,
point that there
yeah,
is
the
the
obvious
obvious
ones
one.
do get
Yes.
support. But I've
Yes.
always remembered the issue of going back to England now, where I saw when I was teaching at the University of Wolverhampton, where students would come over with a statement and they would say, "This is my learning issue," and I was a coordinator for the special needs students who were in the University of at the time in the School of Education, and I would look at these statements and they would be supported financially by the LEA, and also they would get the required accommodations. So I mean, the system was there, but I know that if someone who was capable of doing so well and had, for example, was dyslexic in Jamaica back then, and I'm looking at the ones that are not obvious, then you would not get the required support unless you were able to have the resources, financial resources, or had influential parents who could accommodate that sort of support. So
Yeah.
I think there are some things that we have to consider within context, obvious, and those who are not as obvious. Obvious.
Yeah. I think one viewer here is saying it's navigating the system that's important in Jamaica. Parents who lack funding cannot easily access these resources to do the testing and the analysis. What do you have to say about that?
I think and everywhere you go, it's going to be the same. I mean, in the United States too, if you do not know the system and you do not know the regulation, then you have a problem. And that's why one of the key things that many people do in the United States is to have advocacy group that can advocate for parents who are unable to navigate the system. There are quite a lot of groups like that in the United States. So I
Yeah.
think back in Jamaica and the Caribbean, we need to start having people who can advocate. For example, as a special needs specialist, based on my qualifications, I can go in and I can say to a teacher or even a psychologist who tells me X, I will ask her, then how do you explain Y? Because I have that knowledge to question that. So parents sometimes it's difficult. And I think teachers also play a part in helping parents to navigate that part, especially in Jamaica and the Caribbean, because getting the required testing that could change a life outcome for that child is important because that child will need the support. And then for going back again, and all the examination institutions, for example, CXC and all those bodies will need to also align themselves with how these assessments should take place regarding the child's
In
learning
terms
needs
of
and
the
assessment.
modifications
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
accommodations, the accommodations.
Accommodations, yeah, accommodations and so far. Because back in the UK, when a child could get a person to be a script and so forth, I'm not saying that would be the same context, but you apply it based on the learning needs and of that student.
But do you believe that the legislative framework is there to support the kind of practices that you're describing?
When you think about it, I think there's a emerging framework because I know they've been working on quite a number of things. But the issue for me is, and I know they have started, for example, a new section at the Sam Sharp Teachers College. So I
Yeah.
think the curriculum wise, it's there. But I think when it comes on to the framework, more will need to be done because you have to think of how the multidisciplinary approach is going to be used and so forth. So I think as they go forward, they'll have to really cement on the operationalization of anything that they have. And one of my greatest concern is that many times Jamaica and the Caribbean in general, we take policies from United States and other countries and kind of use them without really contextualizing it. When I talk about contextualizing it, I'm talking about yes to the social need requirements and also the funding. So you can't
Yeah.
be too ambitious with a project because it will fail. So let's start small and let's build ourselves up. And guess what? Have that curriculum change so teachers and so forth can be a part of the identification and support of students with special needs.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point. I see one person saying there's a learning disabilities versus learning difficulties. I think they're maybe going back to the point that we were talking about, the obvious differences.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
ones
yeah.
that
So
are
one
hard.
is obvious and one might be hidden at the same time. I think you think you're quite correct in saying that.
Yeah, yeah, that's coming from one of the viewers. Um, so what about stigmatizing, stigma? Sometimes some societies aren't very um, comfortable, even parents and families, to accept. Do you think that exists within the
I think
culture?
I think Jamaica. I hope, based on my last view of certain things, and even the concept of how people view people who are getting old and that sort of stuff. And I went back a little while ago in a little thinking about how people have labeled people, and I think there's a stigma because I can remember two or three cases where families, educators back in Jamaica, and that was roughly 2001, had children who had special needs, and no one knew. They practically did not take them out in public spaces and so forth. So I think there's a new movement towards getting accepting the society accepting these children as they are, because I think the most beautiful children are those who might be in need of support. Because I've taught so many children in my life. For example, I remember one in Jamaica. He couldn't even talk, and I was sitting with my head on the desk. I had the flu, and I had to be at work. And he came around with me and just use his hand to touch my chin and say, "Ah, mm, Mm. And that
Yeah,
said so much to me. He was
yeah,
able to reach out to me. I've not yet seen that in another child from
yeah.
that day. But I think as a society, we have to embrace them, understand they are also part of our society, and don't hesitate to support them. And in every sense, be advocates for them.
Yeah.
And how to be advocates for them and let people know that they're just a normal person or society, and they have values, they have human rights, and they need to be included in our society.
But I suspect that for this to be effective in our school environment, it means that the teachers, the people at the chalk face, will have to be the ones who are doing a lot of the identification and also the modifications in instruction, so that learning can be effective. One observer here is saying teachers coming out of the teachers' colleges and universities should be equipped through their training course to deal with learning disabilities and to identify that there are difficulties. To what extent do you think
I
teacher
think
training courses
I,
are preparing teachers for this scenario?
I think when I look at even teacher training in United States now, I know Jamaica still has a high rank on my part when it comes on to curriculum development and that sort of thing. So I would hope that, based on what's happening and the current trend, it will be a move towards identification, or you know having a case that you can say, all right, to the parent, you might want to get this done for that child. However, you know that there's going to be a need for people, psychologists, educational psychologists, to actually carry out the testing. So I think
Yeah,
there needs to be greater access to these individuals, because teachers can do so much, but they cannot determine that that is a child's issue. So I think we
yeah.
have to have a sort of agency work, multi-agency working, where, for example, a school psychologist is, rather than attached, I don't know if this is a system, attached to an educational region, is attached to a school and makes connection with
Uh,
a guidance counselor. So I think a personal connection, and that means you'd have to have more educational psychologists to do the assessment and testing required over a period of time, because these tests are quite extensive and require a lot of analysis to do observation, classroom observations, and so forth, before you can come up with some of the disabilities that students have. So I think it's going to take a greater effort on getting more educational psychologists into the system, so that my guy on the raft won't say he has to go to Region 4, but knows that within the school, there's someone that will have have to visit the school over a period of time within a month to do that
yeah.
and do the necessary testing.
So that's really a matter of what the educational funding is prioritizing, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes.
You know,
Yeah, because I think if we invest now, and as you know, if we invest in making these children's lives better for the future, we're going to save on a lot of intervention. We're going to save on the social justice reform and so forth that we're trying to push. So I mean, get it right now, so you get the guys engaged, so they can have a job, so they when they leave school, they know that they are marketable, rather than thinking of the next thing they're doing to say how they can do what they should not be doing. You know.
yeah, yeah. So it's about long-term
Long
thinking.
term,
You're saying that
yeah,
a multidisciplinary, multi-agency approach you
approach.
talk about, yeah?
Yes, that's what I'm talking
And
about.
your book is called Organizational Inclusivity,
Yes,
and you're extending that idea into saying that even on the ground level within schools, we need to have a much more inclusive
yes,
classroom
definitely.
environment.
Definitely. The story goes on and on regarding the need for inclusion at every level in every sector for society. Without inclusion, then we have a society that is always going to be in rift, and you can see what's happening in the United States. We have an education system that is inclusive, so more individuals will be able to get the maximum from the education system, rather than having schools not getting enough funding or not getting the best qualified teachers. So I think all
Yeah.
these are support. So I think all these things come together.
Yeah. But you mentioned advocates, and I do wonder how helpful it is if, for example, the advocates are people who are, say, specialists. Wouldn't it be a much stronger environment if everyone sees this as something that they advocate for? Like it's literally like it's a stance that people take that we will always be inclusive.
Yeah, I think I had that thought before, Dr. Barker, but someone said in a meeting the other day when we were talking about an issue regarding the need to advocate for others. The person said, listen, I don't know how to advocate. And
Okay.
it's possible because advocacy requires courage, it
Yeah.
requires knowledge, it requires a need to create change. And if you are not empowered to do so, because you have to be empowered,
Yeah.
then you cannot really advocate. You have to advocate for self before you can advocate for others. So I think
Yeah.
we have to build those capacity um, in all areas. And I think one of the things that we might need in schools is a greater partnership between schools and parents.
Yeah.
Because schools can empower parents to what be advocates by providing information and sitting down explaining certain things to them. So I think that's a part of the role that we might need to look further on, enhancing the partnership within schools and the local community too.
Yeah.
You know.
And then there's the other piece I wanted to just tease out from you a little bit, where because a child is diagnosed with special educational needs, should that then set a ceiling on what they can achieve?
No, if you look at any assessment, it doesn't set a ceiling on what the child can achieve. I think any good individual education plan will outline a baseline, but never it restrict that child at any point in time. It creates a framework that the child will be able to access the curriculum at his or her level to achieve the goals and objectives outlined. So it's never a limit. It's always a pathway for movements towards achieving what needs to be achieved at that level.
Okay. Okay. Well, some very powerful thoughts there, and I'm sure, as I said, there's a lot of questions coming in. I'm putting them up as they come through. But just as you said, your book is Organizational Inclusivity. It's out there. It's on Amazon. But not only that, you're doing a lot of work. It seems getting resources out there just to start to bridge that gap and to bring some
Yeah,
awareness to the whole inclusion space. So really, really good to have this conversation.
I'm
Dr.
happy.
Jowallah.
I'm happy we had that. Happy,
Yeah, and
happy.
I'm hoping that it sparks another set of conversations so we can get some some dialogue going on this, and perhaps in the end some practical action as well, where real outcomes, for students who are in this scenario, it becomes more possible.
That is so true. That's so
All
true.
right. All right, man. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for dropping you
All
in,
right,
you know.
take care. Take
All
care.
right.
Thanks
Take
again.
care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good. Let me end.